I woke up to 3 inches of fresh snow on the morning of November 15th, which wouldn't have been a problem if my snowblower, salt spreader, and 2 brand-new snow shovels hadn't vanished from my garage overnight. The garage door had been closed when I went to bed. I was certain of it. Now it stood half open, and the concrete floor where my winter equipment had been stored showed only dusty outlines and a few scattered rock salt crystals. My name is Patrick Garrison, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Springfield, Massachusetts, for exactly 8 months. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I bought the place: tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, reasonable HOA fees. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that the HOA president, a woman named Deborah Hutchins, treated her position like she was running a military dictatorship rather than a community organization. I stood in my garage wearing nothing but sweatpants and a thermal shirt, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped to 23 degrees overnight, and more snow was forecast for the afternoon. I had specifically purchased all that equipment 2 weeks earlier, spending nearly $800 at the hardware store, because the HOA guidelines stated that all residents were responsible for clearing their driveways and sidewalks within 24 hours of snowfall. Failure to comply resulted in fines starting at $100. I walked down my driveway, my bare feet already going numb on the cold concrete, and looked up and down Sycamore Drive. Every house on my street appeared quiet, curtains drawn, only a few porch lights breaking the pre-dawn darkness. My next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, had already started clearing his driveway with a snow blower that sounded like a small aircraft engine. I jogged over to him, wincing as my feet hit the frozen ground. "Frank, hey Frank." He shut off his machine and pulled his ear muffs down. "Patrick, what are you doing out here without shoes? You'll catch your death. Did you see anyone near my garage last night?" "Someone stole my snow removal equipment." Frank's weathered face creased with concern. "Stole it? That's terrible. I didn't see anything though. I was in bed by 9. You should call the police." "Yeah, I will. Thanks anyway." I hurried back inside and immediately dialed the Springfield Police Department's non-emergency line. A dispatcher took my information and told me an officer would be by sometime that morning to file a report. Then I called my insurance company, who informed me that my deductible was $1,000, which meant I would get exactly nothing for my stolen equipment. I pulled on boots and a heavy coat, grabbed a dustpan from under the kitchen sink, literally the only thing I had that could move snow, and went outside to start the impossible task of clearing my driveway with kitchen supplies. The snow was wet and heavy, and after 30 minutes of scooping tiny dustpan loads and dumping them on my lawn, I had cleared maybe 10 square feet. That's when Deborah pulled up in her silver Lexus SUV. She rolled down her window, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite the wind. She was probably 45 but dressed like she was trying to attend a country club luncheon at 7 in the morning. "Patrick, the HOA guidelines clearly state that driveways must be cleared within 24 hours. Someone stole my equipment last night," I said, not stopping my pathetic dustpan work. "I filed a police report. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the rules. You'll need to purchase new equipment or hire a service. Otherwise, you'll be fined." "Deborah, I literally just spent $800 on the stuff that was stolen. I need time to save up again." "Then I suggest you borrow equipment from a neighbor. The rules apply to everyone equally." She rolled up her window and drove away. I wanted to throw the dustpan at her car but settled for muttering several choice words under my breath instead. Frank saw the exchange and walked over, his driveway now completely clear. "She's a piece of work, isn't she?" he said. "Here, take my spare shovel. I've got an old one in my garage you can use for the season. No charge." "Frank, I couldn't." "Nonsense. We're neighbors. That's what we do." 20 minutes later, I was making actual progress with Frank's shovel when a Springfield PD cruiser pulled up. Officer Jennifer Rodriguez stepped out and took my statement while I continued working. She walked through my garage, took photos, and copied down the serial number from my snowblower's manual that I had kept with the purchase receipt. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Garrison," she said. "These kinds of thefts are hard to solve unless someone tries to pawn the equipment or we happen to spot it, but I'll file the report and keep an eye out." "I appreciate it." After she left, I finished my driveway around 9:30, my back screaming in protest. I had just sat down with coffee when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Hi, I'm Nicole Armstrong. I live 3 streets over on Maple. I heard about what happened to you. News travels fast around here." Deborah called an emergency HOA board meeting this morning. She made a big show of saying that theft doesn't excuse rule violations. I think she's horrible for that, and I wanted you to know that not everyone on the board agrees with her. "You're on the board, Secretary." "Against my better judgment," she smiled ruefully. "Anyway, I also wanted to tell you something. Yesterday evening around 7, I was driving home from work and I saw Deborah's Lexus parked in front of your house. She was sitting in it just watching your place. I thought it was odd at the time." My stomach dropped. She was watching my house. For at least 10 minutes. I noticed because I had to circle the block looking for where my husband parked our car, and she was still there when I came back around. "Did you see her do anything?" "No, but given that your garage was robbed a few hours later." Nicole shrugged. "I'm not saying she did it, but it's suspicious." After Nicole left, I sat on my couch trying to process this information. Would Deborah really steal from me? It seemed insane, but then again, she had shown herself to be unreasonably rigid about the rules. Maybe she wanted to make an example of me, the new guy who didn't understand how things worked in her little kingdom. I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what to do. I could barely afford to replace the equipment right now. Between my mortgage, car payment, and student loans, my budget was tight. The snowblower alone had been $500, and that was on sale. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice zip-tied to my mailbox. It was a formal HOA violation citation, signed by Deborah, stating that my driveway had not been cleared within the required time frame, and I was being fined $100. I had until the end of the month to pay or face additional penalties. I drove straight to the hardware store and bought a cheap plastic shovel for $12, which was all I could really afford. It would have to do for now. That afternoon, more snow fell, another 4 inches, and I spent 2 hours clearing everything with my flimsy shovel that started cracking by the time I finished. A week passed. Every time I saw Deborah driving through the neighborhood in her Lexus, I felt my blood pressure rise. I started parking my car in the garage and keeping the door closed at all times, but the damage was already done. I had no proof she had taken my equipment, just suspicion and Nicole's account of her watching my house. Then, on November 23rd, Frank knocked on my door looking agitated. "Patrick, I don't know how to tell you this, but I just saw your snowblower." "What? Where?" "In Deborah's garage. I was walking my dog past her place and her garage door was open. I recognized it because of that yellow stripe on the side. You showed it to me when you first bought it, remember?" My heart started hammering. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And there were 2 red-handled shovels hanging on her wall that looked an awful lot like the ones you described." "That's them. The brand puts red rubber grips on all their handles. Frank pulled out his phone. I managed to take a quick picture before she saw me and closed the door. It's not the best angle, but you can make out the snowblower. I looked at his phone screen. The photo was slightly blurry, but definitely showed a garage interior with a snowblower that matched mine in the foreground. I could just make out the yellow racing stripe I had thought looked cool in the store. Frank, can you send that to me? Already done. I immediately called Officer Rodriguez and explained the situation. She said she would look into it, but that a blurry photo wasn't enough for a search warrant. She needed more evidence. I asked what would constitute enough evidence, and she suggested catching Deborah with the equipment or getting her to admit to taking it. That night, I lay awake formulating a plan. If the police couldn't help me yet, I would have to help myself. The next day was Thanksgiving, and the neighborhood was quiet as families gathered indoors. I spent the morning alone, eating a sad turkey sandwich and watching football, but my mind kept returning to my stolen equipment sitting in Deborah's garage just 5 streets away. On Friday, I put my plan into action. I knew from the HOA newsletter that Deborah volunteered at a charity downtown every Friday afternoon from 2 to 5. At 1:30, I watched her Lexus drive past my house heading toward the main road. I waited 20 minutes, then walked to her house on Birch Lane carrying a small backpack. Her house was one of the larger ones in the neighborhood, a 2-story colonial with cream-colored siding and black shutters. Her garage faced the street with a row of windows across the top. I walked up her driveway trying to look casual, like I had every right to be there. When I reached the garage, I stood on my tiptoes and peered through the dusty windows. There it was. My snowblower sat in the center of her garage, and hanging on the wall were both of my shovels and my salt spreader. I pulled out my phone and took multiple photos from different angles, making sure the yellow stripe was clearly visible in every shot. I also photographed the serial number plate on the side of the snowblower, which matched the number on my receipt. As I was taking pictures, I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I spun around to find an older teenage boy, maybe 17, watching me suspiciously. He had Deborah's blonde hair and sharp features. "I'm Patrick. I live over on Sycamore. That equipment in there belongs to me. It was stolen from my garage last week." "That's my mom's garage. You shouldn't be here." "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but that snowblower is mine. See the yellow stripe? I have the receipt and the serial number. Someone took it from me and now it's in your mom's garage." The kid's expression shifted from suspicious to uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about that. I'm not accusing you. But can you tell me if you saw your mom bring this equipment home?" He looked at the garage, then back at me. "I don't want to get involved in whatever this is. You should leave." I held up my hands. "Okay, I'm going. But if you know something, the right thing would be to tell the truth." I walked away, my heart pounding. At least now I had clear evidence. I drove directly to the police station and showed Officer Rodriguez the photos. "This is good," she said, examining the images on my phone. "With the serial number visible and your purchase receipt, we have probable cause. Let me talk to my sergeant." An hour later, I was following 2 police cruisers back to Meadowbrook Heights. Deborah's Lexus was now parked in her driveway, meaning she had returned from her volunteer work. Officer Rodriguez knocked on her door while I waited on the sidewalk, as instructed. Deborah opened the door, and I watched her face go through several expressions when she saw the police: confusion, then concern, then what looked like carefully controlled anger when she spotted me on her property. "How can I help you, officers?" Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Madam, we have reason to believe there's stolen property in your garage. We'd like your permission to take a look." "Stolen property? That's ridiculous. From whom?" Officer Rodriguez gestured to me. Mr. Garrison reported equipment stolen from his garage on November 15th. We have evidence suggesting those items are currently in your possession. I have no idea what he's talking about. That equipment in my garage is mine. Can you provide proof of purchase? Deborah's jaw tightened. I don't have to prove anything. You can't just come into my home based on this man's accusations. Actually, madam, we have photographs showing equipment matching Mr. Garrison's stolen property, including a visible serial number. That gives us probable cause. You can either allow us to verify the serial number voluntarily or we can obtain a warrant. Your choice. I watched Deborah calculate her options. Finally, she stepped aside. Fine, but I'm calling my lawyer. The officers walked to her garage with Deborah trailing behind, phone pressed to her ear. I stayed on the sidewalk, but I could see them examining the snowblower. Officer Rodriguez wrote something in her notebook, then turned to Deborah, who was now speaking urgently into her phone. 5 minutes later, both officers walked back to where I stood. The serial number is a match, Officer Rodriguez said quietly. We're going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. We're arresting Mrs. Hutchins for larceny. I watched in disbelief as Officer Rodriguez returned to Deborah and explained that she was being arrested. Deborah's face turned red and her voice rose to a near shriek. This is harassment. I'm the HOA president. You can't do this to me, madam. You need to calm down. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back. I will not. This is absurd. That equipment is mine. The second officer stepped forward. Madam, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we are doing this. You're under arrest for larceny. You have the right to remain silent. As they read Deborah her rights and placed her in handcuffs, neighbors began emerging from their houses. I saw Nicole Armstrong standing on the sidewalk 2 houses down, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Frank appeared next to me, his eyes wide. Is that really happening? He whispered. Yeah. Good. At the police station, I spent another hour giving a detailed statement about the theft, the timeline, and Nicole's observation of Deborah watching my house the evening before the equipment disappeared. Officer Rodriguez told me that my property would be held as evidence, but would be returned to me after the case was processed. What happens now? I asked. She'll be arraigned, probably Monday. The prosecutor will decide what charges to file. Given the value of the stolen items and the fact that she held a position of authority in the community, they might take it seriously. I drove home feeling surreal. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt nervous about what would happen next. Deborah clearly wasn't someone who accepted defeat gracefully, and she still technically had authority over the HOA until the board removed her. That evening, my phone started ringing. First it was Nicole, calling to say that an emergency board meeting had been scheduled for Sunday to discuss the situation. Then it was Frank, who wanted to make sure I was okay. Then it was a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Garrison. This is Linda Hutchins, Deborah's sister. I need to talk to you about dropping these charges. I didn't file charges. The police arrested her based on evidence. My sister made a mistake. Surely we can work this out without destroying her life. How much do you want? I don't want money. I want my equipment back, which the police are holding as evidence. Your sister stole from me. She said she thought the equipment was abandoned in the neighborhood. She was just trying to keep it safe until she found the owner. That's a lie. It was locked in my garage, and she would have had to break in to get it. Plus, Nicole Armstrong saw her watching my house the night before. Nicole is a troublemaker who has always been jealous of Deborah's position. Look, my sister is willing to reimburse you for any inconvenience. Tell your sister to talk to her lawyer. I'm done with this conversation. I hung up, but the calls kept coming. Different numbers, different relatives, all trying to convince me to somehow make the charges disappear. I stopped answering. Sunday afternoon, I attended the emergency HOA board meeting at the community center. About 40 residents showed up, which was apparently unprecedented. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nicole called the meeting to order, explaining that Deborah had been arrested and was therefore temporarily suspended from her role as president pending the outcome of her case. The board would elect an interim president. A man named Richard Summers, who I had never met, stood up immediately. I think we need to be careful about rushing to judgment. Deborah has served this community for 6 years. We should wait until all the facts come out. The facts are pretty clear, Frank said from the back row. She stole equipment from Patrick's garage and got caught with it. The police don't arrest people without evidence. We only have Patrick's word for what happened, Richard countered. For all we know, there was a misunderstanding. Nicole held up her hand. I saw Deborah watching Patrick's house the evening before the theft. I've already given a statement to police about that. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. I sat quietly, letting others defend me. It felt strange having neighbors I barely knew arguing on my behalf. Eventually, Nicole managed to restore order. The board voted to elect her as interim president, with only Richard voting no. Then they moved to other business, including what to do about the fine Deborah had issued me for not clearing my driveway fast enough after my equipment was stolen. I move that we void the fine and reimburse Mr. Garrison for the administrative fee he would have paid, said an older woman named Margaret Chen. Seconded, Frank called out. The motion passed unanimously, except for Richard, who abstained. The meeting adjourned after an hour, and several neighbors came up to shake my hand and apologize on behalf of the community. It felt good to have support, but I knew the real battle was still ahead. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work to attend Deborah's arraignment at Springfield District Court. The courtroom was small and surprisingly crowded. I spotted Deborah sitting at the defense table with a lawyer in an expensive suit. Her blonde hair pulled back severely, her expression icy. When the judge entered, we all stood. The Honorable Margaret Foster was a black woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every trick in the book. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named James Watkins, read the charges. Larceny over $1,200 in value, breaking and entering, and abuse of authority. The breaking and entering charge surprised me, but apparently the police had found evidence that my garage door lock had been picked. Deborah pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her lawyer, a man who introduced himself as Harold Peterman, immediately launched into a request for the charges to be dismissed. Your Honor, this is a clear case of a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Mrs. Hutchins is a respected community leader with no criminal record. The alleged victim is a new resident who may have misunderstood community property norms. Judge Foster peered over her glasses. Counselor, are you suggesting that HOA presidents have the right to enter residents' garages and take their property? No, Your Honor. I'm suggesting that my client believed the equipment had been abandoned based on neighborhood protocols she had established. Abandoned in a locked garage. The judge did not sound convinced. Your Honor, if I may, the prosecutor interjected. We have evidence including witness testimony that Mrs. Hutchins was observed surveilling Mr. Garrison's home the evening before the theft. Photographs showing the stolen items in her possession and matching serial numbers. We also have evidence that Mr. Garrison's garage door lock was picked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate theft. Judge Foster set bail at $10,000 and scheduled a preliminary hearing for December 15th. Deborah's face remained emotionless, but I saw her hands clench in her lap. As I was leaving the courtroom, Harold Peterman approached me in the hallway. "Mr. Garrison, let's talk settlement." "No, you haven't heard my offer." "I don't need to. Your client committed a crime. She can face the consequences." "My client is willing to pay you $5,000 to drop this matter." "I can't drop it. The state is prosecuting her, not me. Talk to the ADA." "For someone who just moved to the neighborhood, you're making a lot of enemies. Is that really wise?" I stepped closer to him. "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice. Small communities have long memories. So does the Massachusetts Bar Association. I'm sure they would be interested in hearing about lawyers threatening witnesses." His expression hardened. "Have a nice day, Mr. Garrison." I walked out of the courthouse feeling shaky. This whole situation had escalated so far beyond what I ever imagined. All I had wanted was to clear my driveway without being fined. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Someone slashed my tires one night, and though I suspected it was connected to Deborah, I had no proof. The police took a report, but said there were no witnesses or cameras in the area. I had to pay $400 for new tires, money I definitely did not have in my budget. Nicole stopped by a few days later with a casserole and an apology. "The board wanted you to know we're voting on new rules," she said. "From now on, the HOA president can't issue fines without board approval. We should have had that rule all along. Thanks. I appreciate you standing up for me. It's the right thing to do." Deborah had too much power for too long. A lot of people were afraid to cross her because she would make their lives miserable with fines and violations. "Did she do this kind of thing to other people?" Nicole's expression grew troubled. "Not theft, as far as I know. But she definitely played favorites and went after people she didn't like. Last year, she tried to fine an Indian family for the smell of their cooking, said it violated some made-up rule about offensive odors. We shut that down fast, but it showed her true colors." After Nicole left, I looked up case law on HOA disputes in Massachusetts. I learned that HOA board members could be held personally liable for abuse of power and that residents could sue for harassment. I filed that information away, hoping I wouldn't need it. The preliminary hearing arrived on a brutally cold December morning. 6 inches of snow had fallen overnight, and I had spent an hour before dawn clearing my driveway with the cheap plastic shovel, which finally cracked in half near the end. I arrived at the courthouse sweaty and sore, despite the freezing temperature. The hearing room was less formal than the arraignment. Judge Foster reviewed the evidence, which now included the police report, photographs, my testimony, Nicole's testimony, and Frank's testimony about seeing my equipment in Deborah's garage. The locksmith report about my picked lock was also entered as evidence. Deborah's lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but Judge Foster wasn't buying it. "Counselor, the serial numbers match. The victim can prove purchase. Your client was observed watching the victim's home hours before the theft. The items were found in your client's possession." What exactly is circumstantial here? "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence and save it for trial." I'm binding this over for trial. Given the deliberate nature of the crime and the defendant's position of authority, I'm also increasing bail to $25,000. Deborah stood up. "Your Honor, that's outrageous. I have roots in this community. I'm not a flight risk." "Sit down, Mrs. Hutchins. You used your position as HOA president to target and steal from a resident you were supposed to serve. That shows a complete lack of judgment and integrity. You should be grateful I'm not revoking bail entirely." I had never seen anyone actually turn purple with rage before, but Deborah managed it. Her lawyer pulled her back into her seat and whispered urgently in her ear. As we filed out of the courtroom, the prosecutor pulled me aside. "The defense is going to push hard for a plea deal. Are you okay with that?" "What kind of deal?" "Probably plead to a lesser charge, pay restitution, some community service. She might avoid jail time." "Will she have a criminal record?" "Yes, misdemeanor larceny at minimum." "Then I'm okay with it. I'm not trying to destroy her life. I just want justice." "Good. Because trials are expensive and time-consuming, and the outcome is never guaranteed, even with strong evidence. If we can get her to plead guilty and make you whole, that's usually the best result." 2 days later, Harold Peterman called me directly, which I thought was inappropriate, but I answered anyway. "My client is willing to plead guilty to misdemeanor theft and pay full restitution plus an additional $5,000 for your trouble. In exchange, we ask for probation and community service, no jail time." "What kind of community service?" "That would be up to the judge. Let me think about it." I called Ada Watkins and told him about the offer. He said it was consistent with what they had been negotiating, and that he would recommend it to the judge if I was satisfied. That night, I sat in my living room watching snow fall outside my window. The cheap plastic shovel I had been using was now in 2 pieces in my garage. I still hadn't been able to afford a replacement snowblower, and the forecast called for a major storm over the weekend. I was exhausted, financially strained, and tired of this whole mess. But I also thought about what Nicole had said, about how Deborah had bullied other residents for years. If she got away with just a fine and a slap on the wrist, what message did that send? I called Ada Watkins back. "I'll agree to the plea deal, but I want meaningful community service, something that actually makes a difference." "What did you have something in mind?" "Yeah. I want her to shovel driveways for elderly and disabled residents in the neighborhood, all winter. Every snowfall, let her experience what it's like to do the work she was so quick to fine people for not doing." There was a pause. "That's creative. I like it. Let me see if I can sell it to the judge." The plea hearing was scheduled for December 20th. When we assembled in court, Judge Foster listened to the terms of the deal. Deborah would plead guilty to misdemeanor larceny, pay me $800 in restitution for the equipment plus $400 for my tires, perform 200 hours of community service, and serve 1 year of probation. Then Ada Watkins brought up my suggestion. "Your Honor, the victim has requested that the community service be specifically tailored to the nature of the crime. Mrs. Hutchins abused her authority as HOA president and stole equipment that the victim needed to comply with HOA snow removal rules. The victim suggests that Mrs. Hutchins perform her community service by shoveling driveways and sidewalks for elderly and disabled residents of Meadowbrook Heights for the remainder of the winter season." Judge Foster's eyebrows rose. "That's an unusual request. It's also fitting, Your Honor. It directly addresses the harm caused and benefits the community Mrs. Hutchins claimed to serve." Harold Peterman jumped up. "Your Honor, this is punitive and humiliating. My client has a chronic back condition that would make such physical labor difficult." "Your Honor," I spoke up, surprising myself. "May I address the court?" Judge Foster nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Garrison." I stood, my heart pounding. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hutchins fined me $100 for not clearing my driveway fast enough after she stole the equipment I needed to do the job. She showed no sympathy for my situation and no flexibility. She told me the rules apply equally to everyone. I'm just asking that the same standard apply to her. If she has a medical condition that prevents her from shoveling snow, she can provide documentation. just like any resident could have if they needed an accommodation from the HOA. But I don't think she should get special treatment just because facing consequences is uncomfortable. Judge Foster looked at Deborah. "Mrs. Hutchins, do you have medical documentation of this back condition?" Deborah's face flushed. "It's a chronic issue. I don't go to the doctor for every little ache. So no documentation. Here's my ruling, Mrs. Hutchins will perform 100 hours of her 200-hour community service requirement by clearing driveways and sidewalks for elderly and disabled residents of Meadowbrook Heights. The HOA will provide a list of residents who need assistance. She will be required to clear their properties within 24 hours of any snowfall, just like the HOA rules require. The remaining 100 hours will be performed at a location of the probation department's choosing. Mrs. Hutchins will also pay restitution of $1,200 to Mr. Garrison within 30 days. If she violates any terms of her probation, including failing to complete the snow removal duties, she will serve 90 days in jail. Does the defendant accept these terms?" Harold Peterman huddled with Deborah for several minutes. I could see her shaking her head vehemently, but he kept talking to her in a low, urgent voice. Finally, she nodded. "We accept, Your Honor," Peterman said. "Then let the record show the defendant pleads guilty to misdemeanor larceny. I'm also ordering that Mrs. Hutchins resign from her position with the HOA board immediately and be barred from holding any HOA office for 5 years. This community needs leadership it can trust." The gavel came down, and it was over. I walked out of the courthouse into a bright winter afternoon feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My phone buzzed immediately. It was Nicole. "Oh my God," I just heard. "She has to shovel snow all winter. That's amazing." I just wanted something that actually meant something, you know. Trust me. Everyone in the neighborhood is going to love this. Deborah made a lot of people miserable over the years. Seeing her have to actually help people instead of just bossing them around is going to be very satisfying. The first real test of Judge Foster's order came on Christmas Eve, when 12 inches of snow fell overnight. I woke up to find my equipment had finally been returned by the police, complete with an apology note from the department for the delay. My snowblower started on the first pull, and I spent a happy hour clearing my driveway properly for the first time in weeks. Then I drove slowly through the neighborhood to see if Deborah was holding up her end of the bargain. Sure enough, I found her on Oak Street, grimly shoveling the driveway of a house I knew belonged to an elderly woman named Helen Porter who used a wheelchair. Deborah's face was red from cold and exertion, and she was wearing a puffy pink coat that looked completely inappropriate for manual labor. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Morning, Deborah." She ignored me and kept shoveling. "The forecast says another storm is coming this weekend. Hope you're keeping your strength up." She stabbed the shovel into a snowbank and turned to glare at me. "Are you enjoying this?" Am I enjoying seeing someone face consequences for their actions? Yeah, actually, I am. You've destroyed my reputation over a stupid snowblower. No, you destroyed your reputation by stealing my stuff and being a petty tyrant for years. I just held you accountable. You have no idea what you've done. Do you know how many hours I spent working for that HOA? How many projects I managed? How many problems I solved? And I'm sure some of that work was valuable. But it doesn't give you the right to break into people's garages and steal from them. Actions have consequences. You could have just let it go, accepted my offer to pay you back. And then what? You would have kept being HOA president, kept abusing your power, kept making people's lives difficult because you could. No thanks. Enjoy the rest of your community service. I drove away, leaving her standing in the snow. Part of me did feel a little bad, but mostly I felt satisfied that justice had actually been served for once. The week between Christmas and New Year brought 2 more snowstorms, and I made a point of driving by the houses Deborah was assigned to maintain. She was there every time, sometimes shoveling, sometimes using a snowblower she had apparently purchased or borrowed. She never looked happy about it. Nicole called me on New Year's Eve. So the board met tonight to discuss HOA business for the coming year. We voted to add new oversight rules and to reduce the fine schedule. No more $100 penalties for minor infractions. That's great news. We also wanted to ask if you'd be interested in joining the board. We have an opening for treasurer. Me? I've only lived here 8 months, and half that time I've been fighting with your former president. Exactly. You're not afraid to stand up for what's right. That's what we need. I thought about it. The idea of getting more involved in HOA politics wasn't exactly appealing, but maybe that was the point. HOAs only became toxic when good people didn't participate and left all the power to people like Deborah. Okay, I'll do it. Really? That's wonderful. January brought more snow, lots of it. Massachusetts was having one of the coldest winters on record, with storms rolling through every few days. My snowblower got a serious workout, and so did Deborah. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had tried to get her community service transferred to something else, claiming the physical labor was too demanding, but Judge Foster had denied the request. The conditions of her plea deal were clear. One particularly brutal morning in late January, the temperature was below zero and the wind chill made it feel even worse. 18 inches had fallen overnight, and my back was screaming after clearing my own driveway. I was about to go inside when I saw Deborah's car pull up to Helen Porter's house. She got out slowly, moving like every muscle hurt, and started unloading a shovel from her trunk. I watched her for a moment, then made a decision I probably would have questioned if I had thought about it longer. I drove over and parked behind her car. "Need help?" I asked. She stared at me like I had grown a second head. "What? It's brutal out here and you've got a lot of driveways to clear today. I'm already warmed up. I can help with this one." "Why would you help me?" "Because despite everything, we're neighbors. And because Helen is 83 years old and needs her driveway clear. The faster we do it, the faster she can get her groceries delivered." Deborah looked at me for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine." We worked in silence, clearing Helen's driveway and sidewalk in about 40 minutes. When we finished, Helen came to the door and waved, giving us both thermoses of hot chocolate and homemade cookies. Deborah thanked her stiffly and trudged back to her car. "Patrick," she said before getting in, "I'm not going to apologize for what I did. I still think you overreacted, but I appreciate the help today. I don't need an apology. I need to know that you understand what you did was wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "I used the HOA like it was my personal kingdom. I see that now. I thought I was keeping standards high, but I was really just being controlling." She paused. "This is the worst winter of my life. Every time it snows, I want to cry. My hands are covered in blisters, my back aches constantly, and I'm exhausted all the time." "Welcome to what regular people deal with." "Yeah." She got in her car and drove to her next assignment. February was brutal but brought less snow, giving Deborah some relief. I had settled into my role as HOA treasurer and was working with Nicole to rebuild trust in the organization. We held town halls, created transparent budgets, and established clear processes for filing complaints and requesting accommodations. It was boring, tedious work, but it mattered. Frank told me one evening that he had never seen the HOA function this well in all his 15 years in the neighborhood. Deborah ran everything like a dictatorship, but she was also disorganized. "You actually know what you're doing." "I just keep good records and answer emails." That's more than she ever did. March brought the final major snowstorm of the season, dumping 14 inches on us overnight. The forecast said it would be the last big snow before spring truly arrived. I cleared my driveway early, then drove to check on Deborah's assigned houses. She was at her third house of the day, and I could see the exhaustion in every movement. I pulled over again and got out with my shovel. "Don't you have better things to do than follow me around?" she asked, but there was less hostility in her voice than before. "Probably. But this is the last big storm of the year. After this, you're basically done with the snow removal part of your community service." Thank God. We worked together again, and this time she actually made conversation. "You know, I hated you for months, blamed you for everything." "I know. But spending all this time working outside, talking to the residents I'm helping, it's given me perspective." Mrs. Porter told me about the time she asked for an extension on clearing her driveway because she was in the hospital, and I denied it and fined her. I don't even remember doing that, but she does. She said she had to pay her grandson to come shovel while she was recovering from surgery. That's rough. I did that to a lot of people. I thought I was being fair and consistent, but I was just being rigid and cruel. "You could have had me sent to jail. You would have had every right. Instead, you asked for this, and I see now why. It's not just punishment, it's teaching me something." "Are you learning?" "Yeah. I'm learning that rules without compassion are just tyranny. I'm learning that leadership means serving people, not controlling them. And I'm learning that I was a really terrible HOA president." We finished the driveway, and Deborah packed up her equipment. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for stealing your equipment. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. And I'm sorry for the way I treated everyone in this neighborhood. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I mean it." Apology accepted. She drove away, and I stood in the cold March sunshine thinking about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined I would be accepting an apology from the woman who stole from me and made my life miserable. Deborah completed her snow removal community service in mid-March and moved on to the second 100 hours, which she performed at a homeless shelter downtown. I heard from Nicole that she was actually doing a good job and had even started volunteering extra hours beyond her requirement. By the time April arrived and the last of the snow finally melted, Meadowbrook Heights felt like a different place. The HOA was functioning smoothly, residents were engaged and happy, and property values had actually increased slightly according to the latest assessments. I ran into Deborah at the grocery store one Saturday morning. She looked different, more relaxed, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual trying too hard outfits. "Patrick, hi. Deborah, how are you?" "Good, actually. I finished my community service last week. Probation has 10 more months, but I'm staying out of trouble." She smiled slightly. "I'm also starting a new job next week. Social work at a community center. Turns out all those hours at the shelter made me realize I actually like helping people when I'm not in charge of everything." "That's great. I'm happy for you." "Thank you. And thank you for helping me those few times with the snow. You didn't have to do that. We're neighbors. That's what we do." She nodded, and I could see her eyes getting a little wet. "I hope someday I can make it up to everyone I hurt. It's going to take a long time to rebuild trust." "Probably, but you're doing the work. That matters." We said goodbye, and I watched her walk away thinking about redemption and second chances. Deborah had done something truly wrong, but she had faced real consequences and seemed to be genuinely changing. That was more than a lot of people ever did. The rest of spring passed peacefully. The HOA held its annual meeting in May, and Nicole was officially elected president with overwhelming support. I continued as treasurer, And we brought on 3 new board members who actually cared about serving the community rather than wielding power. Summer arrived, and with it came the usual HOA concerns about lawn maintenance, pool rules, and community events. But they were normal concerns, handled with common sense and flexibility. No one got fined for their grass being half an inch too long. No one got harassed for having a garden gnome that technically violated some obscure decoration rule. In July, we held a neighborhood block party, something that hadn't happened in years because Deborah had always found reasons to deny permits. Nearly every household showed up, and we filled the community center parking lot with grills, tables, and music. Frank brought his famous ribs, Helen Porter made her legendary potato salad, and Nicole's kids ran around with a pack of neighborhood children, all of them screaming with joy. I was manning the lemonade table when I saw Deborah walking up the street. She had been invited, along with everyone else, but I hadn't expected her to actually come. The neighborhood had largely forgiven her, but showing up to a community event was still a bold move. Nicole saw her at the same time I did and walked over to greet her. They talked for a moment and then Nicole gestured toward the tables. Deborah nodded and headed over looking nervous. "Hi," she said when she reached me. "I brought cookies. I wasn't sure if I should come, but Nicole said everyone was welcome." Everyone is welcome. That's kind of the whole point. She set down a container of chocolate chip cookies that actually looked pretty good. "I also wanted to tell you something. My probation officer said I'm doing really well, and the judge is considering reducing my probation period. But I told them I want to keep the full year. I need the accountability." "That's mature of you." "I'm trying. It's not easy being the neighborhood pariah, but I earned it. The least I can do is see my consequences through completely." Frank wandered over and grabbed one of Deborah's cookies. "Not bad," he said after tasting it. "You make these yourself?" "Yeah, baking has become my stress relief instead of obsessing over HOA violations. Much healthier hobby." Frank grinned. "You know, my wife used to make cookies just like this. She passed away 3 years ago, but I still miss her baking. I'm sorry for your loss." I should have been more supportive back then. I remember you asked for an extension on some HOA deadline and I denied it. Frank waved his hand. "Water under the bridge. You're here now, you brought cookies, and you're trying to do better. That's what matters." I watched them talk and felt something shift. This was what community was supposed to be: people coming together, supporting each other, allowing for growth and change. Deborah had done something wrong, faced consequences, and was working to make amends. That deserved recognition and support, not endless punishment. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood with Nicole watching kids chase fireflies across the grass. "You did good," she said. "Standing up to Deborah, I mean. You changed this whole neighborhood." "I just wanted my snowblower back." "You wanted justice and you got it, but you also showed compassion when it mattered. That's rare." "She's changing. I think the community service actually worked. Judge Foster is smart. She knew what she was doing." I thought about that winter, about watching Deborah shovel driveway after driveway in the freezing cold, about the gradual change in her attitude and behavior. The punishment had fit the crime perfectly, not just punitive, but rehabilitative. As I drove home that night, I passed by Helen Porter's house and remembered that terrible morning when I first helped Deborah clear the driveway. It had been a turning point, the moment when she started to see me as a person rather than an enemy. And it had been a turning point for me too, when I realized that justice and mercy didn't have to be opposites. August brought a heat wave, and my thoughts turned to other things: my job, my friends, my life beyond HOA drama. But every time I pulled into my driveway, I thought about that morning when I discovered my equipment stolen. It felt like years ago instead of months. In September, Nicole called to say that Deborah's probation had officially ended a month early due to her exemplary behavior. The judge had also expunged her misdemeanor conviction after she completed an additional 50 hours of volunteer work beyond her requirement. She's asking if she can come to the next HOA meeting, Nicole said. Not to be on the board, just to attend as a resident. What do you think? She has every right to attend. She's a resident. I know, but given the history. She served her time, Nicole. She's done everything asked of her and more. We can't punish her forever. Deborah attended the September meeting and sat quietly in the back, not participating except to vote yes on a proposal to increase funding for neighborhood beautification. After the meeting, she approached me. I'm moving, she said. I bought a condo in Boston. I need a fresh start somewhere people don't know me as the crazy HOA lady who got arrested for stealing a snowblower. I get that. When do you leave? End of October. I already have a buyer for the house. She paused. I wanted to thank you before I go. I know that sounds weird, but what you did pushing for that specific community service, it changed my life. I was heading down a path where I was becoming a genuinely terrible person, and you forced me to stop and look at myself. I hated you for it at first, but now I'm grateful. I'm glad you see it that way. I really do hope things work out for you in Boston. Thanks. And I hope you keep making this HOA better. Nicole told me all the changes you've implemented. The neighborhood is lucky to have you. She shook my hand and walked away. I watched her go, thinking about how one stupid snowblower theft had spiraled into this whole journey of accountability, redemption, and community building. October came and went. Deborah's house sold to a young couple with twins who seemed nice enough. The neighborhood decorated for Halloween, and I handed out candy to dozens of kids, many of whom I now knew by name. In November, almost exactly 1 year after my equipment was stolen, the first snow fell. Just a dusting, nothing serious, but enough to make me check that my snowblower was safely locked in my garage. It was, of course. I had installed a much better lock and even added a security camera. Frank came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer. Anniversary, he said, handing me a bottle. Anniversary. 1 year since the great snowblower heist, he grinned. I'm not going to lie, watching Deborah shovel snow all winter was one of the highlights of my retirement. You're terrible. Maybe. But she needed it, and deep down, I think even she knows that. We sat on my porch despite the cold, drinking beer and watching snow dust the street. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, Christmas lights already going up on a few houses, smoke rising from chimneys. You know what I think about sometimes, Frank said. What would have happened if you had just let it go, accepted her money, moved on? She would still be HOA president, probably still making people miserable. Exactly. You did something important when you stood up to her. A lot of people would have just taken the easy way out. I was really just angry about my snowblower, Frank laughed. The best revolutions start over stupid things. The American Revolution basically started over tea. Your HOA revolution started over a snowblower. History is weird like that. We finished our beers and Frank headed home. I went inside and started a fire in my fireplace, then sat down to review HOA financials on my laptop. It was boring, tedious work, but someone had to do it and I was good at it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Patrick, this is Deborah, settled in Boston, started my new job. Thank you again for everything. Happy Thanksgiving. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. Glad you're doing well. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. That night, as I lay in bed listening to wind rattle my windows, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. I had moved to Meadowbrook Heights looking for a quiet suburban life, and instead I had gotten theft, arrest, court battles, and neighborhood drama. But I had also gotten friendship, community, and the satisfaction of knowing I had made a difference. The snow continued to fall throughout November and December, but it was nothing like the previous winter. Each time I fired up my snowblower and cleared my driveway, I thought about Deborah doing the same work as punishment, and I wondered if she ever thought about it too. Christmas came and went. New Year arrived. And then, in mid-January, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Deborah, written on nice stationery in careful handwriting. Dear Patrick, I'm writing to tell you that I've been promoted at work and have started leading a support group for people with criminal records trying to rebuild their lives. It's the most meaningful work I've ever done. I tell them my story sometimes, how I was HOA president who stole from a resident and got caught and had to shovel snow all winter as punishment. They usually laugh, but then I explain how that experience taught me humility and accountability and compassion. I explain how you could have destroyed me, but instead chose a punishment that educated me. I want you to know that I think about that every day, and it makes me a better counselor. Thank you for seeing the possibility of redemption when I couldn't see it myself. Best wishes, Deborah. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in my desk drawer. It felt like the final chapter of a story that had consumed so much of my life. February brought a massive blizzard, the kind that shuts down the entire city. 2 feet of snow fell in 24 hours, and the governor declared a state of emergency. Schools and businesses closed. The streets were empty except for plows. I spent 3 hours clearing my driveway, then walked around the neighborhood checking on people. Helen Porter needed groceries, so I trudged through waist-deep snow to the corner store and brought her supplies. Another elderly couple on Oak Street needed their walkway cleared so their nurse could get to their door, so I spent another hour shoveling. When I finally got home, exhausted and freezing, Nicole had left a thermos of hot soup on my porch with a note. Thanks for being the neighbor this community needs. That night, I fell asleep thinking about how different my life was compared to a year ago. I had moved to this neighborhood as a stranger, just another resident paying HOA fees and following rules. Now I was treasurer of the HOA, friends with my neighbors, and part of a real community. March arrived with warmer weather and melting snow. The neighborhood began to wake up from winter hibernation. People emerged for walks, kids played outside, and the community center started scheduling spring events. At the March HOA meeting, we voted to establish a formal neighborhood assistance program for elderly and disabled residents who needed help with seasonal tasks. We would use part of the HOA budget to hire local teenagers to help with lawn mowing in summer and snow shoveling in winter, ensuring that no one got fined for tasks they physically couldn't complete. This is basically what Deborah had to do as community service, Frank pointed out during the discussion. But now we're making it official and paying people fairly for the work. Exactly, I said. We learned from that situation. Sometimes the HOA rules need to bend to accommodate reality. The proposal passed unanimously, spring turned to summer, and life in Meadowbrook Heights continued peacefully. My second year in the neighborhood was nothing like my first. No theft, no drama, no court appearances. Just normal suburban life, HOA meetings about swimming pool renovations, neighborhood barbecues, and friendly waves as people walked their dogs. In August, I got coffee with Nicole at the cafe downtown. "You ever hear from Deborah?" she asked. She sent me a letter back in January. "Sounds like she's doing well in Boston." "Good. You know, the whole situation with her was awful while it was happening, but I think it taught all of us something important about power and accountability. What do you mean? We gave Deborah too much power and no oversight. When she abused that power, no one stopped her because everyone was afraid. You weren't afraid and you held her accountable, but you also showed mercy when it mattered. That's the balance we need in any organization. I just wanted my snowblower back. Nicole laughed. You keep saying that, but you know it became bigger than that. You changed how this whole HOA functions. She was right, of course. The HOA rules we had now were better, more flexible, more compassionate, more focused on building community than enforcing arbitrary standards. We still had standards, but we also had common sense. September marked 2 years since I had moved to Meadowbrook Heights. The HOA held a small reception to celebrate our new community assistance program, which had been wildly successful over the summer. 15 teenagers had earned money helping elderly neighbors with yard work, and residents were happier than ever with how the HOA was functioning. Frank gave a speech thanking everyone who had worked to improve the neighborhood, and he specifically called me out. 2 years ago, Patrick moved here and immediately faced one of the worst abuses of HOA power I've ever seen. Instead of moving away or just accepting it, he stood up for what was right. He pursued justice, but he also pursued rehabilitation. And because of that, our entire community is better. So thank you, Patrick, for being exactly the kind of neighbor we need. Everyone applauded, and I felt my face turn red. I wasn't comfortable with public recognition, but I appreciated the sentiment. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was an unknown Boston number. Hello? Hi, Patrick, it's Deborah. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course. How are you? I'm good. Really good, actually. I heard about the community assistance program through the HOA newsletter. I'm still on the email list. I wanted to call and tell you how perfect that is. It's exactly what should have been in place all along. We learned from what happened. That's the best possible outcome. Listen, I'm calling because I'm getting married in November to a man I met at work, a social worker. He knows all about my past and he loves me anyway. I'm telling you because you're part of my story, and I wanted you to know that I'm happy. Genuinely happy in a way I never was when I was playing dictator with the HOA. That's wonderful, Deborah. Congratulations. Thank you, and thank you for everything else. I mean it. You saved my life by holding me accountable. After we hung up, I sat on my couch thinking about redemption and second chances. Deborah had committed a crime, faced real consequences, and emerged as a better person. That was how the justice system was supposed to work, even if it rarely did. The years continued to pass. I remained HOA treasurer, working with Nicole and the board to keep Meadowbrook Heights a great place to live. We had our challenges, disputes between neighbors, budget issues, maintenance problems, but we handled everything with common sense and compassion. I never saw Deborah again, but I heard updates occasionally through the newsletter. She had gotten married, adopted a dog, and continued her social work in Boston. She had built a new life, free from the toxicity that had defined her years as HOA president. And every winter, when the first snow fell and I fired up my snowblower to clear my driveway, I thought about that chaotic first year. About discovering my equipment stolen, about fighting for justice, about watching Deborah shovel driveway after driveway in the freezing cold. About learning that accountability and mercy weren't opposites, but partners in creating real change. The neighborhood kids who had been toddlers when I moved in were now in middle school. Frank's hair had gone completely white, and Helen Porter celebrated her 90th birthday with a party at the community center that the entire neighborhood attended. Life moved forward, as it always does. But sometimes, on quiet winter evenings when snow fell softly outside my windows, I would remember that morning I woke up to find my garage ransacked and my winter supplies gone. I would remember the anger, the frustration, the determination to make things right. And I would remember Judge Foster's ruling, ordering Deborah to shovel driveways all season long, and I would smile. Because justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and a community had been transformed. All because someone stole a snowblower and I refused to let it go. That was my story, the HOA drama that changed everything. It started with theft and ended with redemption, with a whole lot of snow shoveling in between. And somewhere in Boston, a woman who used to be HOA Karen was living her best life, probably telling her story to help others, and maybe occasionally thinking about a neighborhood in Springfield, Massachusetts, where she learned what it really meant to serve a community instead of ruling it.